Steve Politi from NJ Advanced Media. Welcome back to the Rutgers Rant. We've got a football season, fellas. James Kratch, Keith Sargent. It is the weirdest thing how I feel right now. It really is. I feel half of me is like, well, I feel like I love college football. I want to be there. I want to cover it. I want to write about it. I want to talk about it. It's one of the reasons why I got into this business. The other half of me is the guy who, was on the phone with weeping emergency room doctors and stood in a crematorium and saw just how devastating this thing was. And I wonder, that half of me wonders what the hell we're doing. So that's kind of where I'm stuck with. It's just sort of an amazing reversal. The Big Ten explained the decision in great detail about the advances in antigen testing and how that will allow the fact that they think they will be able to get to a point where they're, close to zero positivity rate on these teams. I'm going to go to you, Sarge, first. I'm just curious what you thought about just the nuts and bolts presentation of the Big Ten today. Do you buy into the fact that this is going to be something that's going to work to get a season in, that the players are going to be healthy? I mean, what did you think when you heard how they explained this?
I'm like you. I was skeptical. And I'm like you. I'm also kind of torn that I love college football. As far as the Big Ten presentation, I think the big thing is, like you mentioned, the daily testing. And basically what that means, in a nutshell, is they concede that players are going to get it, that whether players or coaches, that the coronavirus is out there. Their ultimate goal is to prevent a spread. And the spread is obviously important to prevent from the standpoint of just a community standpoint, but also from a roster standpoint, because we saw with Rutgers, for example, it started with 6 players, and then within 2 weeks, it spread to 30 different players, different position groups. So, in order to prevent that, your entire offensive line from going down, you need to have that daily testing. That way, again, they're conceding that, players are going to get it, staff members could possibly get it, but, if they have this daily testing procedure in place, they'll be able to prevent, wide scale numbers of players from getting it.
Right. Well, that's what the Northwestern president said today, Kratch, during the call. He said, that this was all about science. I mean, I tried not to giggle on the call. Of course, it's all about, the money, number one, and number two, all about getting Ohio State just off their backs from going crazy. And I think we saw, while there are 14 members in this conference, just how powerful one of them is. And to a lesser degree, Nebraska, although I think they probably could have gotten away with pissing them off. I mean, what was your takeaway from this thing today? Why are we playing? And did you buy what the Big Ten had to say?
Yes and no. I mean, look, I think why we're playing is because, one, yes, there have been medical advancements. I think that, I wrote about this back in July when I did that story about teams, how they would travel to road games. And one of the epidemiologists at Rutgers told me, once we get this rapid antigen testing online, it's going to completely change the game, because it's going to detect the virus before it's a full-blown infection in your body. And then it's then going to be in a situation where we can run a test quickly. Basically, what he told me was, this is in effect like a quick flu test, where you can take it. If you test positive, then you can take it again in an hour, and they can kind of keep going and eventually get to the PCR test to confirm everything. I think so, yes. I do think that things have changed medically for the Big Ten, but there was a tremendous amount of rancor and outrage, and they're scared of the fact that Notre Dame and Iowa State are playing football, and they're not.
Of course.
And the SEC is going to play that. I think the medical advancements certainly played a role, but if it was like the Pac-12, which obviously is a totally different situation because the teams can't practice and there's these wildfires, if people had just said, we believe in the Big Ten, I don't think we'd be here today. I think it's a financial thing. I think it's a pressure thing, but it also helps that the medical advancements came along in time for them.
Well, this is the amazing part. They're approving this while I think Wisconsin's campus is still closed. I think Minnesota's facing the same situation. And the two words that, to me, that didn't come up during this were the word second wave. And I know, Sarge, you've covered this thing. You've talked to as many more experts than I have. The idea, and no matter who you speak to who follows what the coronavirus is doing, they are convinced that what's coming at us in October and November is going to be an absolute, what? I mean, it's going to hit us hard again. The cases are going to go up. The flu season is going to be a factor. We're going to see just another side of this thing that we haven't seen yet. I mean, what do you think happens then, Sarge? Do you think the league is prepared for that? Do you think we get to the point where we play games? And if we do you think we're any chance every team plays 8 games?
So I'll try to answer each one of those questions for you, because I know our listener base, this is what they come to the Scarlet, the Rutgers.
Absolutely. Epidemiology.
Exactly.
Right here for the most the current and stuff about viruses and what you want from us.
Exactly. And for the record, my email is available. If you have any sort of ailments, shoot me an email. WebMD. I'm available on that too.
That's right. Yeah.
So to answer your question, the reason why, because I did one of my last stories when I was on the news side beat was the potential second wave, and the reason why, in a nutshell, that a lot of medical experts believe that there is a very good, high chances, because this is like a pneumonia, and any of these types of viruses, based on history, 100 years of studying these types of viruses, it's always been worse in the fall and the winter. And the reason being is because more people are indoors, and whereas in the spring and the summer people are more outdoors. I know that you saw some cases down south and some spikes there, but New Jersey, New York, the numbers were a lot better in the summer. So the potential of going back indoors, that's the reason why a lot of people believe that there's going to be a second wave. As far as whether or not I believe this is possible, look, I mean, I think time will tell. I think the big key is going to be preventing a spread, because I think, again, coaches, are aware of the fact that players are going to get it, that there's no bubble that's going to be able to prevent, some cases. Greg Schiano was on a call today. He said that, there have been more cases, within the team, since we last touched base with him on August 12th. Keep in mind, none of the players were even on campus from August 11th until September 1st. So,
right.
That just goes to show that, players are going to get it. Again, we're talking about the ability to manage your roster in order to play, a football game. What the Big Ten said today, and Kratch might be able to talk about this as well, is if a player gets it, that player needs to sit out for 21 days, 3 weeks. And the reason being is because of the uncertainty with the heart issues, that they need to find out whether or not A, that the player has recovered, and B, whether or not the player has long-term effects from any heart issues. 21 days, that's 3 weeks. I mean, think about that. So if you
third of the season,
exactly, third of the season. Yeah.
So
I was saying,
you go ahead.
I was going to say, I actually think this is going to be the bigger issue for the Big Ten than the actual coronavirus at this point, because yes, with the rapid testing, you're probably, unless something horrific happens, you're not going to have a situation like Rutgers had a couple weeks ago where you've got 30-something kids with the virus. But all right, so you're Rutgers. We know this is not a terribly deep roster. Whenever they set up the roster, set up the 2 deep. So that's 44 kids on your 2 deep. If 4 of them test positive, you've lost about 10% of your 2 deep for 3 weeks at least. Yeah. And if that's just if they're asymptomatic and they don't have any issues. If they're symptomatic, it's going to be longer. If God forbid they develop myocarditis, it's going to be longer. So I think that's going to be the issue. The issue is going to be that if you can have 10, 15, 20% of your roster knocked out for a third of the season, and if it's the wrong 10 or 20%, I mean, and that's what I wonder, is Ohio State gonna be eager to go to Penn State if they've got 10 starters missing? Is Michigan gonna show up for the Michigan State game with a fifth-year walk-on quarterback as their only guy? I mean, that's where I think this is going to become the issue. That yes, they might push the testing down, but if you have a couple of positives and the wrong thing, you're going to have very short-handed teams.
And wouldn't that be something if it's Ohio State?
We have to cancel games.
Wouldn't that be something if it's Ohio State? That would just be incredible.
Arkansas State had 8 starters out or something, and they had to postpone a game because they had an outbreak. But they're just going to Kansas State to get a paycheck. Ohio State's trying to win a national title, and now they're going to be eager to show up when they, that's why I think the bigger issue. is going to be in terms of playing this whole schedule, 9 games in 9 weeks, is do you have enough people to put on the field safely more than does the virus come out?
Right. And remember, it's not the football part was never the problem. It's the college part. And, as much as they talk about the testing, they haven't solved the bigger issue, which is that the many times you tell a young person not to go to a party when they're in college, I mean, they're still going to do it. There's no, and these rosters are big. I mean, you've seen the number of cases they have at a place like LSU or, Ed Orgeron just says, got the entire teams, got it. I mean, it's good. Was that a good impersonation?
That was a great impersonation.
You think so? Yeah.
Just letting them,
I'm going to go on tour later. But the point being that, these are still things that they can't control and they don't have an answer for. So, I think we're headed to a situation where there's going to be a lot of cancellations. There's just really no way around that. All right. How about we talk Rutgers for a minute? That's a crazy idea. We had Greg Schiano on a call, as Sarge mentioned. He said there's a bounce in the step, a little excitement in the building, but when he elaborated and just spoke to the challenge that's facing him now, and he brought up this point. I'm going to write my column about it for tomorrow. Spoiler alert, but that this team has not blocked or tackled since they walked off the field in State College for their 10th loss last year. He's never seen them live tackle, which is just amazing. Spring, if you're not following what I mean, spring practice was wiped out. Right. I mean, it was it was supposed to start right after all the, mayhem happened in the spring. And then training camp was wiped out, and then when they pulled the plug on the season. So, he's going to go into this 5-week sprint to get a football team ready. And Kratch, maybe you could talk about this. It sounded like to me that he still doesn't know who's on the team. Like he's going to try to get some guys who said they're going to opt out to opt back in. I mean,
I think that's kind of an issue. I mean, I think that they don't know who's on the team. I mean, look, I thought for the longest time, we discussed it and fans have asked about it, there was no roster. And I was kind of like, you're supposed to play a spring game months ago. Like, where's the roster? Greg talked about it and said, we're going to have a roster next week, but he legitimately seemed to say he held the roster because he doesn't know who is or isn't going to play.
Right.
So, obviously, we know there's been more than one opt-out. Everett Wormley, I believe, is the only Rutgers player who's gone public and opting out. But then again, that whole situation has changed. So I think it's going to be a tremendous challenge for them. But I will say this. They may not have blocked and tackled yet, but I guarantee you, even then, they're probably a better tackling team now than they were under Chris Ash.
The bar is on the ground. That is a very good point. Can you keep that in mind? And I heard someone say to me that the roster – it could be the 2 deep could be 60% different from where it was at the end of the year. And I totally believe it. If you gave me a blank sheet of paper and a pencil and said, go ahead, tell me who's going to start in this, I couldn't do it. Sarge, I mean, what do you think right now, just going into this thing that this team's going to look like?
It's a great question. One bit of news, Greg Schiano did talk about, and we reported right after Everett Wormley opted out that there were about 7 players who had made the decision to opt out. None of those names were reported, but Greg Schiano did talk about today that he's going to have conversations and about the potential a lot of those players opting back in. As far as your guess, quarterback, Art Sikowski, Vidral. Interesting, I think they'll give the freshman a chance. Evan Simon. I think, you talk about the tackling thing. He hasn't seen any of these guys actually, throw a meaningful pass or catch a meaningful pass or he hasn't seen any of them. I do know, having talked to him over the summer about it, he's confident in 2 position groups. He's confident in the linebacker core, which if you look at it, there is a lot of depth. I think you have a Big Ten linebacker core, and he's confident in the running backs. Beyond that, your guess is as good as mine. I don't even think the head coach knows at this point.
Right, and that leaves a lot of wiggle room. I mean, I think you're looking at depth problems on the defensive line, and just so many newcomers too. Kratch, when you bring in all these players from different places, you've got to expect that there's going to be a huge, just curve of learning to play together, and we've seen it. Look, we saw it with the NFL, right? They didn't have preseason games. They didn't have, and a lot of them, I watched the Steelers on Monday Night Football. They came out and you're like, God, did these guys practice? They're really sloppy for the first half. I just can only imagine what that's going to be on the level that it is in college football.
No, I mean, I think it's going to be kind of disjointed, ugly football. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that, not to get back on my favorite subject, but Army's played so well the first two games because they've been up in the woods since June and they've had a real training camp, but no one else has. I think that's going to become the issue. We're seeing Arkansas State goes out and beats Kansas State because they've already played a football game. They've gotten the kinks out while the other team hasn't. So I think it's going to be a major challenge. And on top of that, no matter how they chop it up, this schedule is going to be very hard for Rutgers. It's going to be a physical gauntlet. And even with this little carrot, the idea of this bonus crossover the last week of the season set up by the standings, Rutgers is likely going to play Illinois and Purdue, who I think might be the two lowest, worst teams in the West in the regular season. Barry Alvarez said, we don't want rematches. So Rutgers, surprised, you could get the fifth place team in the West, which may be Iowa this year.
Right, that's just amazing. Sorry, I was going to say when Cratch began his Army, recitation, I wonder what other three teams do you think he has in the college football playoff with Army right now?
Hey, if they beat Cincinnati, guys, I'm telling you.
Wait, do you think it's Alabama, Clemson, Army, and who the other team that's going to be with him right now in the playoff? Yeah.
I just think it's a welcome change. Last time we did a podcast, he had the Army shirt on. He took the Army shirt off.
Right, yeah,
so
exactly.
That's a welcome change.
That is a change. It's good. All right, you want to take some Rutgers Insider questions? We have a bunch of them, and maybe we can just circle back and just figure out what we haven't touched on. But if you guys don't know it already, NJ.com/text. We've been firing out some text, guys, and we've done. I think we must have had 25, 30 updates in the last few weeks with all this craziness, a lot of behind the scenes stuff. We did the best we can to give you facts and even some conjecture. All right, the first question. My question is simply: do you feel that they did their homework and put protocols and safeguards to keep things as safe as possible, or do you think they just caved to public opinion? In other words, do you have the sense that this is the safest route they could take, or is it more like the other conference that just opened regardless? I mean, my first thought on that, Sarge, is that it's certainly not the safest route. The safest route is not playing. There's a reason why the Ivy League's not coming back. So I certainly don't think that's the case. But as far as the homework part, everyone I talk to seems to think, that the rapid testing is a game changer.
Yeah, I think we, and we're skeptical to begin with. But I think, ultimately it comes down to a business decision. And as we've reported, all these schools, stand to lose a ton of revenue from this. I think ultimately this is probably boils down to, the amount of revenue that all these schools stood to lose. None of these schools could stomach it. Again, we can go on and on about the rapid daily testing, and there have been some advances, and that does help. But I think ultimately, that just gives them, they were looking for a second opinion. If I, have to go to a doctor, I get a really bad medical diagnosis. Guess what? I'm going to get a second opinion. I think that's what a lot of these schools, particularly Ohio State, Nebraska, were all trying to get a second opinion. And once they were able to get that, they look, the Big Ten, Cratch wrote in a story today, and I've written it before. It's the most lucrative conference in America. We're talking about a $780 million operation. They're going to be able to throw money at it, just like the NFL did, and just like MLB, all these professional leagues. The Big Ten is going to be able to throw money at the daily testing, and that will give them the confidence to be able to forge ahead.
Cratch, give me your thoughts on that. What percentage do you think was public opinion, and how much do you believe the idea that this is the safest route?
I would say that I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say it was, 80%, they feel comfortable with the medical advancements. But the public opinion definitely, I think, brought them at least to the table to consider these changes. Because I think if the public opinion wasn't there, they may be like the Pac-12. Obviously, as you said, the Pac-12 was a different situation. Said, hey, we'll start this at Thanksgiving or something like that. Because as you said, these campuses are not in great shape. I think at the very least, they would have at least said, hey, why don't we take a month and maybe wait till November, early in November maybe before we play.
All right, we get another comment here, and a lot of people just said, beyond comments, a lot of questions. With the rapid test hitting the shelves, there's going to be a lot more positives. Players will be test positive. They basically won't be able to practice or play for 21 days, and then you won't be able to get in your lineup. You're going to have entire positions depleted from the virus. Some teams will end up with linemen as running backs. It just goes on to point out, you're right, absolutely right. There's a great comment about all the things that are going to happen here because of this. I guess, Sarge, what do you think? How many teams are going to pull the plug on themselves? And the other side of this is interesting because as you pointed out early on when you saw the statement, Rutgers can pull the plug on the game if it doesn't like what it sees on the other part of campus too. I mean, if Rutgers doesn't like what it's seeing from Michigan, it can say, yeah, no, we're not playing that game. The president of the university has that authority. What do you think? How many of those are you going to see?
I think the issue is going to be the perception of it, right? Like if Rutgers all of a sudden opts out, or, in a given week, you're going to see, rival coaches, use that against them on a recruiting trail. So I think the perception of canceling games, no matter how valid a reason, I think it becomes a hot button issue where head coaches are not going to want to use that. Give teams the advantage. I've also thought about this. So the opposite perspective is I think 10 different transfers from Power 5 programs. There's a chance, guys, that the way Greg Schiano has flipped a roster, and again, we haven't seen a practice. We might not see a practice between now and October 23rd or 24th. There's a chance that maybe all of a sudden the way he's flipped this roster, that a team like Rutgers, I'm not saying he's going to win the Big Ten, but maybe they could win 4 or 5 games.
What you're not seeing now, folks, on the podcast is that Kratch just had to go. I don't know where he had to go. He had to go. I'll be right. He just texted me and said, "I'll be right back. I've got to get the dog." And I'm like, okay. And so then he comes back on the screen with his dog, which of course is adorable. And now the dog is in Kratch's apartment wrestling with a dog toy on the bed as we're recording the podcast. Now, this is interesting on many levels, but also because we've been told a million times to record in like the corner of a closet sompplace. So now Kratch has got it. How's the dog doing there?
Hazel's been a little active. She's been good. This is a 2-person household, and we're both on work calls at the moment, and
yeah,
I just was able to kind of spring free. So I got Hazel. She's playing with her moose, and it's all good.
What does Hazel think about the breakdown here of how many games are going to be played?
Well, see,
Hazel sounds very angry about it. Actually, I don't know what that's about. Hazel. Wow.
Hazel. So Hazel came to our house during the pandemic, and she has separation anxiety. So Hazel would prefer the Big Ten stay sidelined.
Why does Hazel hate sports, Kratch? Why does Hazel hate sports?
I don't know. She actually she works at a phone bank for the Biden campaign on the side. So no. So I think what Sarge said is right. It could kind of go both ways. But my whole thing is this: with the opt-out situation, is that the Big Ten, in my opinion, has to do with the Big 12 didn't set criteria for what constitutes not playing. Because, as I said, you got 10 starters out, and you don't want to play the next football game. Oh, we can't do this, fact-finding mission. The other question I have is, what happens if, Rutgers is supposed to play Purdue 1 week, and their game with Maryland gets canceled 2 weeks, 3 weeks earlier? Does the Big Ten suddenly say, well, that's a division game, so you're not playing Purdue anymore?
I'm sorry, I stopped laughing when you said Hazel had separation issues.
I take the trash out. She starts crying.
That's tough, man. That's rough. All right, a few more questions. I like this one. We talked about it. Vedral or Siskowski? Who's the starting quarterback? Kratch.
I'll stick with Vedral, but why not both? I mean, this is a weird season. Everyone's got a free waiver of eligibility. Play them both.
Yeah,
play Evan Simon. That's what I'm saying. Greg, I don't know if he's going to do this. He should play the entire roster, evaluate everybody, and then move forward.
And there's no reason and he mentioned it today about you bringing bigger players back. It's absolutely the case. This was a good point, and Kratch, you did the obituary on Brian Sheridan, one of the great linebackers linebackers in Rutgers history. A reader wanted to know: any of you have memories of Brian Sheridan playing football at Union High School or Rutgers? He always told his family that. He always told the story that he told Joe Pa he was going to Rutgers at the dinner table when the legendary Penn State coach visited him. I have one quick one. I didn't cover him as a player, Sarge, you might have, but I covered him when he took over his alma mater, Union High School program. This was probably in 2007. I did a column about him wanting to bring that program back to its storied heights, and I spent a good deal of time with him talking about that, and it's just amazing to me, because he obviously then was a young, strong, just fit guy, and to see this, 45 years old taken from us is pretty amazing. Sarge, how about you? Did you cover him as a player?
I did not, but I just know from. He was a linebacker who was always around the ball. He was one of the best players on some really bad Rutgers teams, in the late '90s. And I'm like you, I dealt with him a little bit. When he was a head coach, was always professional. So completely, stunned by it.
Yeah, Cratch, did you talk to any people about? I mean, was the news a surprise to a lot of people?
I think it definitely was a kind of a stunning thing. Obviously, he was sick for some time, but there was no mention of that. He was being interviewed for high school football previews as recently as a couple weeks ago. I got a lot of emails from people who knew him, teammates. He left Union, I believe, right my first season on the beat was right when he left Union, so I didn't cover him. I did cover Union High football, and I know Lou Grasso's kind of gotten the program back to where it used to be. Made a couple sectional finals. I was sitting Brian coach Jamari Bogan, who had that huge year for Union. I think in 2011 when they went to the state semifinals. So no, it is really a horrible story, and kind of a guy who I think is probably a little bit forgotten in Rutgers history. He's not like a Marco Battaglia, and he's that era right before Greg arrived.
Right. All right. A few more questions. We have one just basically asking, what is the temperature in that coaching room? Do you think that they were quietly or not so quietly praying for a spring season? Sarge, I mean, I think obviously given the choices, they would rather not have played than play now because they want to preserve that recruiting class. I mean, what's your set? Do you think that they are kind of dreading this, or now that it's here, kind of looking forward to it?
I think you have two for players. I think the majority of players, and again, we haven't had a lot of access with the players, but for my understanding, the majority of players want to play. So I think from that standpoint, I'll take Greg Schiano as where he said there was a bounce in the step of players going through the Hale Center today. From a coaching standpoint, you'd have to give them truth serum to get the real answer out of this. But I think, like anyone else, I mean, I think, ultimately I did say, there's a, scenario in place where, other teams have issues where, all of a sudden Rutgers upgraded his talent. Maybe they can, surprise some teams this year, but odds on, we're talking probably a last place Big Ten East Division team. They're going to struggle. Does Greg Schiano really want that first year, 2-6 or 2-7, I should say, mark on his resume? Probably not. Ultimately, though, he's a competitor, so I think you'd have to really give him some truth serum to admit it. But from a standpoint of not having that black eye on a resume and be able to recruit and try to build up the roster, I think that would have been probably a good thing for Greg Schiano.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing is the expectations are on the ground, right? There couldn't be any lower. People expect this team to go 0-9. Hey, 2-7 with a couple of close games against big opponents. That might be people. They might sign for that. All right, that's what we got question-wise. You guys have any final thoughts on this crazy few days? I mean, anything else you want to say that just kind of sums up what we've gone through here?
I feel bad for the fans. I wrote about it. One of my favorite stories that I've written in a while, only because, it was able to put the spotlight on the fans, but just how, and this, I mean, we've been covering this for a long time. This is a really passionate fan base. We go through the tailgates. I interviewed a fan who gets to the parking lot, around 3 a.m. for every game day. It doesn't matter if they're playing at noon, 3:30, 8 p.m. He's there at 3 a.m., every game day.
Yeah.
The fans won't be allowed in games. I mean, I think we kind of knew this was going to be a scenario, but now the Big Ten made it official. I feel bad. I feel bad for, that the fans won't be able to, because college football, and you watched the Giant game on Monday night. It was surreal, not seeing fans in attendance. But to me, I almost I'm kind of used to it by now, watching the MLB games and the NBA games that, no fans. College football, the fans are so much part of the atmosphere, whether it's the tailgates or the pageantry. It's just, I don't know, it's just not going to feel the same. I feel bad for the fans that they're not going to be able to experience, the game day festivity.
Yeah, you're totally right. And the NFL is a different beast. Those games could be played in the soundstage. The college atmosphere, the fun in the stadiums. I mean, the camp, the road trips. It's just a different. The marching bands. Yeah, all that's going to be gone. Cratch, why don't you leave us with a final thought? Give me something.
I'm excited. I'm going to cover football. I think it's going to be strange. I mean, I'm kind of, part of me is like, they're going to do this. I can't wait to see the schedule because I guess I'm going to have to rebook and book hotels for like the third time. That's what's crazy. This is going to be the third different Rutgers football schedule we've had in about 2 months. So that's going to be interesting. So, yeah, no, I mean, look, it's good. It's kind of strange. And I think I'll reiterate what I said last week. It's going to be like living in a painting that's 75% done. It's supposed to look like, but it's just not the same.
All right. On that note, I'm going to sign off. Steve Politi, Keith Sargent, James Cratch, Hazel Cratch joining us here today for the Rutgers Rant, a crazy thing in college football. Hey, we'll be back to talk about football, I think, an actual football podcast in just a few weeks. So thanks for listening again.